Ouvre tes yeux bleus, ma mignonne, voici le jour. Dis-je la forêt te fredonne en chant d'amour. L'aurore épanouit la rose, viens avec moi cueillir la marguerite éclose. Ouvre tes yeux bleus, ma mignonne, voici le jour. À quoi bon contempler la terre et sa beauté? L'amour est rempli de mystère qu'un jour d'été. C'est en moi que l'oiseau maudit le chant vainqueur. Et la grand soleil qui nous brille est dans mon cœur.
Chris Merritt. Chris Merritt with Warren Jones at the piano. Music by Jules Massenet. Open Your Blue Eyes. Chris Merritt, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having
New
me.
York. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You've had a very successful 20-year career and a big year coming up, and I'd like to talk about some of those things, both past and in the future. But you grew up in Oklahoma City, is that right?
That's right, yes.
And during the last hour, we had some members of a string quartet who were saying that they all grew up in very cosmopolitan musical households and the ways in which that helped and hindered their careers. I wonder, growing up in Oklahoma City, that's sort of off the beaten path, but you chose to stay there through university even. What were the advantages of that for you?
Well, I'll tell you, off the beaten path, I think, is the key phrase here, because as one looks at it on a map, it does seem to be off the beaten path, especially right smack in the middle between New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. But, however, Oklahoma City, all during the time that I was growing up, was very influenced by New York City, was very influenced by the Metropolitan Opera. The Metropolitan used to come to Tulsa Opera on tour, and then they circumnavigated down to Dallas. But everybody who was interested in classical music in Oklahoma City could always find something. There were always people coming through doing recitals. I heard Jose Carreras in his very early days coming through recitals. I heard Joan Sutherland, I heard Marilyn Horne many times. I heard many people sing in different capacities with our symphony orchestra, which was quite a wonderful symphony orchestra in those days. And then besides that, having performing venues, because the University of Oklahoma and my university, which is Oklahoma City University, were big performance schools. So I was able in my high school years to see performances, actual performances with orchestra, with costume, with staging. I had a great influence, I have to say, even though we were off the beaten path. It seemed that some people were trying to beat a path, at least, to Oklahoma City to give us a little bit of culture.
Yeah, it sounds like it wasn't so much off the beaten path. It sounds like
no. Usually people think
very
of
well-trodden path.
People think of Oklahoma City as they always ask me how the farm was that I was growing up on, and I never, I have never even been on a farm. I grew up in Oklahoma City, which used to be the largest area city in the United States until Jacksonville, Florida, took in its boundary towns, and then it became the largest one. But it was always city life for me, and so because of that, people coming through, at least on recital tours and so on, I had the chance to hear, to see dancers, musicals, everything that came through, always came through Oklahoma City. So there was some exposure.
Mm-hmm. And that launched you into what has turned out to be a very successful career, 20 years
20
so
years, well, 19 years, 20 years next year.
20 years
I
next
made my
year.
professional debut in 1975 at the Santa Fe Opera in Falstaff.
The career that has included performances in all of the major venues, the Metropolitan Opera, La Scala in Milan,
Chicago, San Francisco,
Chicago,
there's
every
many,
place,
yes.
every place. And I wonder what it's like for a vocalist, especially at a place like La Scala, the first time you walk out on the stage at a place where you know if you don't do a great job, the audience is going to let you know, and they're real connoisseurs. What's that like, the very first time you walk out on the stage at La Scala?
Well, I think I was very young and stupid when I made my La Scala debut. So and I was surrounded by very many people. My debut was the great piece of Rossini in his old age, Il Viaggio a Reims, which he wrote for the French public. And Claudio Abbado was making a resurrection of this piece, and so there are at least 10 major roles. So I was making my debut standing alongside of Katia Ricciarelli, Lucia Valentini Terrani, Ruggero Raimondi, Samuel Ramey, Cecilia Gazdia. There were many people on the stage with me, so I didn't feel so exposed. I do know that the one thing that I remember I'd always read about during my life was what they call the Kala spot, the place in the theater where you stood to sing because of the acoustical pluses that you could find there. And I was trying my best to find that Kala spot without telling anybody, and of course everybody knew what I was doing, and finally they started coming up to me and whispering over my shoulder where it was. Each one had just a little variation of where that was, but it was basically in the same position.
What does that mean, the Kala?
Callas spot,
Callas
the spot that Maria Callas was famous for when she wanted to make a very important vocal point. She stood in that spot, and it's very strange acoustically because it sounds like suddenly you come into a microphoned area, and it's downstage right or on the audience left side as you're sitting in the audience, and it's very strange when you step into that area. It suddenly catapults the voice into the audience. Nobody knows why, but everybody always goes for it.
I'll remember that when I make my debut.
Yes, you should.
At La Scala. Now, you've also had the great honor now of opening La Scala a couple of times, back-to-back years. Is that right?
Well, the first year I became the first American tenor to open in 39 years. In the
that was
old days,
1988?
that was in 1988, and in the old days, Eugene Connolly, the great American tenor, sang there quite often. So he probably opened very, very many times La Scala season. Since then, I became the first American tenor to open the season in 39 years. And then the following year, the 89-90 season, I did with Riccardo Muti again, I did I Vespi Siciliani, which was the first time in history for an American tenor to open La Scala twice in a row. And then they asked me for the next year to open in Idomeneo, which would have been something unheard of for an American tenor to open 3 times in a row, especially in a title role. But instead, I opted to make my Metropolitan debut aside the great Marilyn Horne in Semiramide here in New York City.
So you've had, obviously, to this point already, a very successful career, but coming up, May 20th, will be your New York solo debut.
It will be my New York City recital debut. It will be my recital debut at Carnegie Hall on May 20th. That does not mean I have not sung at Carnegie Hall. I started singing there in 1983. And have sung there quite often in different concert operas and so on and so forth. But this is the first time that I will be able to sing by myself with my wonderful pianist helping me out, Warren Jones. And that will be in the large hall, as a matter of fact, at Carnegie Hall.
That's coming up on May 20th, and you have some other debuts coming up this year as well.
Yes, this year is for some reason fell together as a debut year. I've just come back from making my debut at the Théâtre de la Monnaie in Brussels in the title role of Rossini's Otello. After this, then I go on to Toulouse and make my debut there with Michel Plasson and his orchestra. Then we take it is Les Troyens, and we take that on to the Athens Festival, where I've already sung. And then I go to Verona to sing for the first time in the Arena di Verona, singing for the first time Pollione in Bellini's Norma. And then after that, I go for the first time to the Salzburg Festival, where I sing the title role in Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito. And then later on in the 94-95 season, I will be going going to Saint-Étienne in France, where the Massenet Festival is held, and will be making my debut there, singing for the first time the title role in Massenet's Le Cid. So it's quite a debut year for me. 1985, maybe it's every 10 years or something the moon sets right, because 1985 was a big debut year for me as well, when I sang for the first time at La Scala, at Chicago, at Hamburg, at Covent Garden, at different places like that.
Well, let's kick the year off right with some more music right now, if we could. We need to get you warmed up for this big year that's coming up. Once again, Warren Jones at the piano, and he's joined by CHRIS MERRITT, or perhaps I should say CHRIS MERRITT, tenor, is joined by Warren Jones at the piano. And this next set will start with the Sailor Song by Haydn, and we'll go right from that to music of Brahms, Wie bist du, meine Königin. CHRIS MERRITT, tenor, joined by Warren Jones at the piano, performing for you live on Around New York on WNYC.
He careless whistles to the gale. Rattling ropes and rolling seas. Hurly-burly, hurly-burly. War nor death can him displease, can him displease. Hurly-burly, 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 hurly-burly. Nor death can him displease, can him displease, can him displease. The hostile foe his vessel seeks, high bounding o'er the raging main. The roaring cannon loudly speaks, 'tis Britain's glory we maintain. 'Tis Britain's glory we maintain. Rattling ropes and rolling seas. Hurly-burly, hurly-burly. War nor death can him displease, can him displease. Hurly-burly, 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 hurly-burly. War nor death wandle hin. Unschöne Graten breiten sich, ob fürchterliche Schwüle dort. Einander brüten. Lass mich vergehen in deinem Raum. Es ist in ihm ja selbst der Tod. Ob auch die Herbst der Todesqual die Brust durchwühlt.
Tenor CHRIS MERRITT performing first a song by Haydn, the Sailor's Song, and we just heard music by Johannes Brahms, Wie bist du, meine Königin. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more conversation and performance from CHRIS MERRITT in just a moment.
He wrote some English songs that I think the most famous one is My Mother Bids Me Bind My Hair. I think every probably young soprano has had that one time in their life. But he wrote a group of songs in English. It's very odd to study the music because the top line is English and the bottom line is German. It looks like the printer got himself in a mess and printed it upside down because usually the German is on the top and the English is on the bottom. No, but they're a wonderful group of English songs by the Austrian-German composer Joseph Haydn. I'm doing 3 of those, as a matter of fact, 3 English songs written by him.
It sounded like he must have been fairly conversant with English to include things like hurly-burly and
things like that. Yeah, well, of course he had people writing the text for him, I'm sure. I think that Handel and he, as both of them, were pretty versed in writing things in English, even though they were from the Germanic countries. Handel especially loved to write things in English. As we know, many of his operas and his oratorios are in English. And I'll be singing 2 oratorio pieces from 2 of his English oratorios, Samson and Judas Maccabeus, which were in English by a German composer. I think that was probably the fashion of the day.
And those will be part of your May 20th Carnegie Hall concert. Now, we were talking earlier about some of your operatic performances, but of course you've done a great deal of just concert performance also.
Yes.
A great deal indeed. And I wonder about the different demands that those 2 different kinds of performances make on you, and what kind of opportunities they give you for expression as well. I mean, they're very different.
They're different venues, yes. I think probably demands, I don't know. I think there's always a demand on a singer, no matter what he does. In any venue, there will always be demand or a heavy weight on his shoulders. I think the big plus, as far as I'm concerned, I have done countless numbers of recitals. And I find that it is probably my favorite vocal venue because you are your own boss to be able to program it the way you feel vocally best. And then you can choose the music that you like the best. You can put it in the arrangement that you like the best, what comes first, what comes second. You can choose your pianist to help support you, the one whom you like the best. And then you have a one-on-one relationship with the audience, which you don't get to have in an orchestra in front of you and lights in your face and so on when you have an opera. And I find that this contact and this presentation of oneself really on a personal, I guess they used to call it during the Olympics, the up close and personal level, that really, really does appeal to me, and it is a plus for me. I don't know, other singers may feel rather naked or something. I find it kind of like a liberation, if you will, and I get into speaking with the audience as well. For some reason or other, I always have to say something. I can't help myself. And I went last night. It's interesting. I went to Marilyn Horne's recital at the recital hall at Carnegie Hall, a Weill recital hall, and she said the same thing, that she likes to speak to the audience as well. And I know my wife looked over at me like, so you're not the only one, huh?
Well, and you'll get your chance May 20th.
May 20th.
At Carnegie Hall, your recital debut in New York City.
Yes, with Warren Jones.
With Warren Jones at the piano. You mentioned picking your favorite pianist to work with, someone you want to work with, and Warren is the person you've chosen. Warren, I wonder, what is it like as a pianist? What special demands are made on you as a pianist working as an accompanist?
Oh, they're quite severe, actually, because the fact is that what most people don't understand is that playing the piano, if you are a collaborating pianist with either singers or instrumentalists, the ability to play the piano is like having the ticket to the parking lot at a baseball game. It doesn't mean that singers, working with singers, one has to understand and be entirely, thoroughly knowledgeable, practically, well, actually better memorized in the text, because you have to know everything that's going on. One can't sit there and play the piano about something one doesn't know anything about. And then there's the question of understanding singers' breath. I was just doing a string of recitals with Samuel Ramey in Europe, and one evening backstage I told him a story about a flutist that I've worked with calling me one day and trying to disguise her voice, and I was sort of perplexed for about the first 5 seconds, and then she breathed for the first time. And by the way she breathed, I recognized who it was. And when I called her name, she was quite astounded that I was able to recognize her intake of breath.
That's amazing.
But you have to learn to read things like that. If you're playing with an instrumentalist, you learn to listen to how does the bow work? When are they about out of bow? You don't need to look. One doesn't need to watch. One needs to just have the feeling and have the intuition about what's happening. The same way with a singer like CHRIS, for example, he has very good breath support, very good breath control, and it enables him to do gymnastics with his voice that other people couldn't do, and that's a great luxury to be sitting behind someone like that. And have that ability.
Praise from Caesar.
Now, the two of you are working together on stage, obviously very closely on stage. Is this like a dance team? One leads and the other follows, or is there more interplay back and forth between you?
I think the art to collaborating with anybody is to know. Both partners need to know when to lead, when to follow, and when to do it together. And that's really the essence of working together, is knowing that. And one learns how to send signals across silence or through music. I've told people frequently that I feel like I know a lot of famous singers. I work with a lot of different people. I know a lot of secrets about famous singers that are quite safe because I can never tell them because they're entirely musical. They have nothing to do with language or anything that can be expressed outside of music and breathing. So they're all safe.
Well, maybe you could play us a secret about Samuel Ramey on the piano.
No.
Well, we have some more music coming up. The next set will start with some Rossini, and you have a special relationship, Chris, with the music of Rossini.
Yes, I have had, yes, let's put it that way.
20 or more than 20 Rossini
Rolls.
roles? I don't think no one I can think of has done that many Rossini roles.
Probably not. Probably Rockwell Blake may come close to it if he's not there as well. The great luxury that I have had in doing the Rossini roles and accumulating so many is that there were very many operas that Rossini wrote in his Naples days when he wrote for the the great Teatro San Carlo, he had at his disposal two divo tenors, and he felt compelled to put both of them in major roles in his operas. So there are very many operas that have two major tenor roles.
Those are the ones that you don't hear a great deal because there aren't two major tenors who are willing to sing together or able to
or
sing
to be
together.
with each other on the stage. But because of that, I have, at one place or another, some of them sung one of the roles or the other, so I can say that I have sung both tenor roles in La Donna del Lago, both tenor roles in Ermione, and so on and so forth. So that allows me to have a choice of more roles than, say, we were speaking of Marilyn Horne. There are not that many great contralto or mezzo-soprano roles for her because he wrote at maximum one role per opera, and not all of his operas had major mezzo-soprano roles. I think it just turns out to be something that by happen chance for me, that Rossini did. It's not something that I've done especially, but it was during the time also recently from 1984 or 85, I guess you could say, to 1992, which was the great Rossini bicentennial, that everyone was revving up towards that bicentennial. Everyone wanted to put their mark on the history book pages, the music history book pages, for their contribution to Rossini's bicentennial. So everyone from every part of the globe was calling for someone to come and sing this part, sing that part. And in those, I guess about 6 or 7 years, I was being pulled all over the world to sing those roles because I apparently had an aptitude for it. It wasn't something that I went out and sought. It just happened to happen that way. And now that we've passed 1992, I'm able now to get back into the saddle again of what I had left in 1985, which was the repertoire that was a little bit more known, some Verdi's, Puccini's, and some German repertoire, Mozart, what I call the Mozart king roles, and so on, Idomeneo, Clemenza di Tito. So now I'm able to go back to that point of 1985 and continue on with the repertoire that I originally started with from 1975 to 1985.
Well, we're going to send you back, I'm afraid, to your Rossini years for just a moment. Tell me a little bit about these two songs we're going to hear, Rossini and Bizet.
Rossini and Bizet, yes. I guess a lovely grouping. Rossini's La Promessa, which is a lovely little song that Rossini has written and many people have sung. I'm sure that there's probably every grouping of early Italian songs you can find La Promessa.
La Promessa it's an interesting song because it's part of the Soirée Musicale, which are the musical evenings. He wrote 2 books in this set of songs. The first is 8, he calls them 8 ariettes, and then there are 4 duets that accompany these 8 pieces. And this one, the fun part about this song is that the text is entirely open to question, is it tongue-in-cheek or is it quite serious?
Exactly.
Because it's, the person says, I wouldn't leave loving you for anything in the world. Nothing could make me stop loving you. And to quote a very famous author, the man protesteth a bit too much.
So
he did that quite often, Rossini. He protested quite often.
So that's the first we'll hear, the Rossini,
Yes.
and then the Bizet.
And then the Bizet, which is Ouvre Ton Coeur. And that, I find, was, as far as I can see, was a great, during the first half of this century, was a great showpiece for tenors. Martinelli was prone to do it quite often. Many tenors used it for their, often signing off their recital evenings or concert evenings. And it's funny, in this part of the century, when I was a student, I only found the recording of Joan Sutherland singing. So I was surprised when I backtracked and found out that many tenors had sung it earlier, and I thought, well, then I'm not so strange after all.
And many tenors have used it to close their performances, and that will be your final performance with us this afternoon. Once again, CHRIS MERRITT, tenor, with Warren Jones at the piano, performing first music by Rossini and then music by Bizet, live for you from the studios of WNYC on Around New York.
Chi amai vi possa lasciare nemmeno gioco vingannero, nemmeno per gioco vingannero, no, 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 vingannero, nemmeno per gioco vingannero, no, 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 vingannero, nemmeno per gioco vingannero, nemmeno per gioco La Margherita per me l'ombra ferile, c'est toujours les yeux du jour. Belle, me tiendras-tu parole? La Margherita a fermé sa Ouvre ton cœur, oh mon amour, ouvre ton cœur, oh mon amour, ouvre ton cœur, oh mon amour.
Tenor CHRIS MERRITT performing works by two remarkable melodists, Ouvre Ton Coeur by Georges Bizet, and we began with La Promessa by Rossini. Tenor CHRIS MERRITT joined by Warren Jones at the piano. And we have just a couple of minutes to wrap up, but I wanted to be sure to mention again your concert coming up May 20th at Carnegie Hall.
Carnegie Hall, that's right.
And this is your New York recital debut
Yes.
at Carnegie Hall.
And my only appearance in New York this season.
Because you have so many other debuts to give elsewhere around the world, in Verona and Salzburg and everywhere else. But you also recently finished recording a CD of heroic bel canto for the Philips label, is that right?
That's right. It was a project which turned into, as we were speaking a while ago, as Rossini had written so many roles for double tenor, that is, double hitter tenor operas. One of those tenors was what we would consider nowadays a dramatic tenor with coloratura possibilities. In those days, they called it a baritenore or a baritone tenor. And I found that it was very interesting because not many people, if any at all, had ever recorded many of these arias. So I have put together an aria album with Philips, conducted by Gian Fiore, to be released this summer in June. And that is 4 dramatic Donizetti arias, we are more used to the rather romantic, dramatic air of Donizetti, and then put together with it 4 dramatic coloratura, if you will, tenor arias from Rossini, and we call it the heroic bel canto tenor. And then in August as well, from the same label, Philips, I will have a new recording of La Donna del Lago coming out, which was recorded live at La Scala with Riccardo Muti conducting. And that will be my Philips release summer this year. Upcoming will be also a CD of the very successful Rossini Bicentennial that was seen on great performances on the PBS channels. And that has been made into a video and now will come out on a CD by EMI. That should be out sometime this fall.
So this is a very, very big summer for you.
Yes.
A pair of CD releases and everything else you mentioned,
Yes.
plus your New York recital debut and recital debuts in Salzburg and Verona and
Debuts everywhere, and we keep plugging along.
well, thank you very much for coming and joining us on Around New York.
Thank you for having me.
Tenor CHRIS MERRITT with Warren Jones at the piano. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for
Warren.
having us.